Welcome, Karen, to the Amp It Up podcast. This has been a long time coming. I feel like we've been talking about this for a long time. How are you?
I know. I am great. I'm energized.
Oh, good. You know, I need some energy in my life. I am drinking an $8 coffee, $8 for this size. And if you guys, you're watching you're listening to the podcast, so you can't see this, but let me just tell you, this is smaller than my head. It's tiny. I mean, I guess smaller than my head is not that small for a coffee, but like, you know what I mean? It's very small. And so I'm filled with energy.
I love it. Good.
Yeah. So we've been talking back and forth ever since we met in person. I mean, it's about 6-7 months ago.
Yeah.
We met in July over at in Las Vegas for the National Speakers Association. And it was my first time ever being there. Had you been before?
Me
Many
too.
times?
No,
really?
No, that was my first time too.
What made you decide to go?
Well, Bert Decker is who I used to work for a long time. He has a company called Decker Communications, and he was an old school speaker there, very well known, very involved. And when I was working for him, there wasn't as much motivation because I was working for a company. It's just like, oh, that's cool, NSA. But then when I launched my own thing, I went, I got to go to this.
Yeah.
And I had such a good time.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I think about this all the time. For people that work in like a corporate setting or are employees, I don't know about you, but I was never as committed to my work until it became my own. Like,
absolutely.
Right? Yeah. Like when you would leave the office, you felt like you were kind of, even though no one really leaves the office, mentally, I kind of did.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. It's funny because if you had asked me that question when I was working in my job, I would have said, well, I'm totally committed here. And I work all the time, because I love it. But there was a total shift when I started on my own and how empowered I felt. The buck stops with me with clients. I have full control. I don't have to run things through 3 or 4 other people to get something approved. And it is amazing.
I know. My favorite part about running our own businesses is literally we are making the rules. There's no right or wrong way. And this is something that I talk about so often. And then we're going to jump right into, but I talk about this all the time is I think you're doing a disservice if you're doing business only the way other people are doing it or telling you to do it. Yeah. Because if it doesn't feel right inside, if it doesn't like intuitively feel right, and I'm so interested how this kind of applies to you and your journey, but it's never going to work out. I feel like it doesn't work if it's not something that intuitively feels good. Right.
Well, and that's what I love about your whole messaging. And you've also been there from what I gather through all of your content, that you've been to the place where you're trying to, I need to do it this way, or because somebody told me to, or, I've been through my experience, or many rounds of that, where it's, well, somebody said this is how you do it, so I better do it this way. And then you go, wait a second, no. And I loved one of your recent podcasts where you said, I'm going to do it. This is my podcast. I'm going to do it my way, and I'm going to have fun. And that is exactly how I feel too. And that in and of itself is so empowering.
Totally. I think we need to do that more. And honestly, now that I think about it, like all the success stories, right? Anyone in any industry, if you look up to someone. So for me, I love Mel Robbins, right? I talk about her often. I might as well get her name tattooed to my face, but I talk about her so much. And if you look at Mel Robbins, she didn't do anything the way you're supposed to, right? Yeah. She was in her 40s, in debt, drinking too much, depressed, couldn't get out of bed, et cetera, et cetera. Like that's not written on the wall of like how you should start a successful business. So I think actually the majority of people that do very well and succeed are the ones that go off the beaten path in their own, they do it their way.
Yeah. Speaking of, a really good story too, by the way.
Great story, right? Like storytelling is such a big part of who we are. So let's get into that because, Karen, I met you, like I said, in person there, but we had been kind of following each other using Clubhouse and Instagram, et cetera. So I love your message and what you stand for. And I want you to kind of explain to my audience, what it is that you love and what you do. But essentially, you're a communications coach. Mm-hmm. You work with women, right? You work with women as a communications coach, but that is so broad, right? So tell us a little bit more about specifically what you help women with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things I want to start with is my favorite. And amount of texts and emails that I get where people say, oh my gosh, I had the courage to ask for more money. I had the boldness to speak up in a meeting when I wouldn't have otherwise, or I had the courage to do an online video and I haven't done it however long or ever.
Yeah.
So to me, that is the heart and the essence of what I help women do from an emotional perspective that drives their performance. Then so that sounds very corporate, but it's
No.
very true. It's like when we feel in our core that we are confident to take action and do something, that's to me the most empowering feeling of all. And that's why I do what I do. But to get more specific, I coach women on how to say anything better. And that's really the ultimate way to say it. And it's whether you're doing a keynote talk or whether you're trying to speak up in a board meeting. Most of the people that I coach are over 40, typically in corporate, where basically I'm coaching myself from 10
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah.
When I think you mentioned that recently too.
Your ideal client is usually you a few
Yeah,
steps ago. Sure.
exactly. And it's interesting because I had so much confidence on the outside, but certain situations I would hold back a lot because I didn't trust myself. And I was very fortunate to have a boss who used to say, there you go again, you didn't trust your gut. And it cost me opportunities. And that's why I'm so passionate about helping women do the same. So typically speaking up in meetings, negotiations, and conflict is where I help people. And then entrepreneurs, helping them craft a powerful introduction, an elevator pitch, and speak on big stages. So
Oh
that's
my
what I do.
gosh, I love that. I love that. So you're giving women the confidence to finally say what they've been thinking or wanting to say and just haven't found haven't found the guts to do it. So why this? Like, was this you?
Yes, two things. Ever since I was a kid, I loved speaking. So that's always been at my core. I'm a classic extrovert and I'm a doer all the time. Like,
Were you
what
like
can I
me
do?
that on every single report card you got told that you speak too much, like talk too much in class? Every report card was like, she's smart, but she talks too much.
Pretty much. It's interesting because that came later.
Mhm.
I was the tip of very quiet, like compliant little girl. So a little
Mm.
bit about my story is that my dad was pretty controlling. I was the old school parents. I'm the last of 9 kids, and my dad called the shots in the household.
Did you say last of 9 kids?
I did.
You were the baby of 9 kids and they still were tough on you. Usually the baby gets away with everything.
I know, exactly. Well,
Wow.
I would say that I was pretty spoiled as the baby, but I was so focused on just wanting to connect with my dad. But what I learned is that my dad, a man or an authority calls the shots, and you have to wait for them to give you permission, because my mom was pretty submissive in the home. Ironically, she was a big leader in the community. But what happened then, what they modeled for me without saying anything, is that I had to wait for a man to tell me that it was okay to speak.
Wow.
And yet, here's the interesting thing. My dad was taking me to flea markets when I was 6 years old, teaching me how to negotiate. He's like, you never take the full, the price that they're offering. You always negotiate for less. So he taught me persistence and determination and grit. I mean, I guess both my parents did for sure, but it was an interesting dynamic because at my core, I always wondered, was I worth who I am and what, like, just being me? I knew I was worth something related to the value that I brought to people, but I always questioned my worth as a person. So that led me on this journey. So I would outwardly, I had leadership positions in lots of cool corporate brands that people would know that are listening, but there was still this part of me that wasn't being myself. And I had this moment when I was speaking on the leadership team at my last job, and I didn't feel aligned with what my boss asked me to do. There's nothing wrong with what she asked, but I remember thinking, that just somehow doesn't sit with me.
Yeah.
Again, I didn't trust my gut.
Yeah.
I was sitting in this meeting, 6 people looking at me, and I found myself paralyzed and I couldn't speak. I was stumbling, and then people were trying to save me because we all got along really well. But the most embarrassing part was when my boss jumped in and she just said, "Hey, why don't we table this for later? Probably a better idea." And I was so embarrassed. She pulled me into her office after and she goes, "Karen, this was a perfect example of you not trusting your gut. Another scenario could have been, hey, why don't we table this?" Just like she said, "Why don't we table this? I don't even remember why we were doing this in the first place. This is something we talked about months ago. Let's talk about it later." And when she said that, I thought, I can do that. Again, I was looking to her
Wow.
as the authority figure. And that was my moment where I said, this has got to stop. I was already on a personal growth journey toward finding more of my voice. And by the way, that's my cat in the background. I'm not attending to a child.
I heard it sounds like a cat. I mean, I've not heard kids make sounds like that unless it's a kid pretending to be a cat.
Thank you. Somebody yesterday on a phone call thought it was a cat or a kid. Anyway, that was the moment where I said, I gotta do this for a lot more. I gotta figure this out for myself, and I've got to help other women do that.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
and so what was your first step? How did you start, helping yourself with that?
Well, I started with an actual very tangible thing that I teach women now, which is, okay, how can I share my opinion in a way? Because that was part of the hard part. What I would do is I would come to the table with, here's all of these ideas, not mine, but like research, for example. And I would ask everybody else, so what does everybody else think? And once again, it was my boss that said, you do that a lot. I want to know what you think.
Mm.
And it even gives me goosebumps now because it was, wow, okay. And so here's what I did. Lots of personal growth work, and a lot of us, we all have different ways that we do things. I enrolled in programs, did a lot of journaling, all those things. But on a very tangible level, what I came up with that felt good for me was to say, here's my vote. So anybody listening, if you're wondering, how do I speak up in a meeting or how do I share my opinion? I've found that that's a really diplomatic way of saying it. And again, I say for me, because I'm somebody, probably because of my Minnesota background, it's very accommodating, like, let's make everybody feel good. And the truth is, there is a way to speak your truth without ruffling feathers. But on the other hand, who cares if you ruffle feathers? I mean, there's you could say it either way, because of course you've got to be diplomatic. You don't want to be a jerk, but at the same time, you want to be as diplomatic. Wait, now I'm totally distracted. I'm sorry.
Don't worry about it.
I think about these things. Now I've got this toy going on over here, but definitely this is real life, right?
Yeah. I don't mind it at all.
Oh, good. Well, it's this balance though of, because part of me, it's funny, I can always edit things. We can all edit things that we
Sure.
say, because of course, on one hand, you've got to be diplomatic to some degree,
Yeah.
but you don't want to be making yourself smaller all the time. And that's the biggest thing that I feel like I've just blossomed in the last 5 or 10 years into being much more comfortable with not caring about, like, not being dependent on what someone else thinks about me before I will share my opinion. And saying, here's my vote, or here's what I think, I have found to be really 2 good sentence prompts that will help me and have helped other women now when they're trying to speak up, when they're not as comfortable with it, when you start dabbling with it.
Yeah, it's almost like it gives you like a little bit of a passageway in, and it becomes one of those things. The more you do it, the easier it gets, just like everything else, right? So you first, like a timid person first starts using their voice and then starts to realize it's not that bad. Okay, nothing happened. Like the world didn't explode, right? We didn't get hit by a meteor. I didn't get fired. People didn't laugh at me. And then it grows into more and more and more. And it takes, practice. It takes like constant practice.
Right.
So then what else, once you started to work on that, and once you started to get a little bit more confident using your voice, like what other positive benefits started coming to your life from that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I felt a lot better about myself. I felt like I was putting myself out there, and it's ultimately, what it is at the end of the day, I feel free. And even, we always talk about like Simon Sinek and all the start with why, and we all got to figure out our why. And when I was starting my online business, so when I left corporate was July 2020.
Okay.
That's when I quit my job. And I remember doing all the things, trying to figure out the brand, very much what you help people with, how to stand out and how to stay as best way possible. And I can remember peeling back the layers. And that's what I recommend everybody do is, you start with, okay, why am I here? So, okay, I want to help women be more confident. Well, why? Well, because I want them to banish self-doubt in their lives. Well, why is that? And the more I kept peeling back the layers, I realized because I want women to be free. And that's really, now that's obviously a little more ethereal for some, because we've obviously got to be concrete about, well, how do you actually help people do that? But there's the emotional feeling. So going back to how I feel is this freedom of not worrying about like, oh my gosh, it's not perfect, or oh my gosh, what are they going to think of me, or oh my gosh, I'm not going to be accepted in this group. And I just feel so much better, and ultimately, I mean, really so much more confident, which is sort of ironic because that's what I teach people.
Yeah. And I feel like, the interesting thing about this is we could all Google this. We could all look on YouTube. We could all find, books and podcasts. And, I do it all the time. Like I talk about things that I say it all the time. What I talk about is not brain surgery. It's not something you'll never find anywhere else. You can Google confidence on camera. You can Google personal branding. You can Google confidence speaking your voice, etc. But sometimes people need someone that they like and trust, that they know has their back, like you. When I talk to you, Karen, my casting director side in me sees you as someone that is very nurturing and very caring. You're calm talking. You speak very like in a very calm manner. That to me is something that a lot of women need when they're coming from a place of maybe stress, anxiety, intimidation, nerves, they're timid, whatever it is. So I think that you're placed in their life as a messenger with this really powerful, important message, but they can do it even easier or faster because they have you in their corner. And I think that that is a really important part of hiring someone rather than just reading a book, right? Like we can all read a book, but I think sometimes you need that person that looks at them and says, you can do this. Let's practice. Let's try. Okay. Use this, try it this way, and gets that feedback. And also just gets like, I always call it, you can call it a pat on the back, but I always call it like a shoulder massage, like in the back, in the corner of the ring, like you got this, now go. And I think you probably have seen like some really cool transformations, right? Over the years from your clients.
My gosh, absolutely. And within a short period of time.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, this, there's nothing quite like video to get you to change a few things.
You see everything wrong.
And so
I realized I talk like Drew Barrymore. I was watching a video of myself because I always do Instagram stories, which feel to me so much easier and they're closer, whatever. But I set up a tripod and I filmed like a 2-minute video for LinkedIn. And I watched it back and I was like, why do I talk on the side of my mouth? I'm like it looked so weird. I didn't notice that until I saw it on video. Okay, keep going.
I love it. Well, and that's the thing. We see these blind spots. And thinking about Clubhouse, I mean, I started that in January 9th of last year. So 20, what was that? 20,
almost exactly the same as me.
Oh yeah. And that really isolated women's voices. And it made me even more passionate because I thought the amount of women that are misrepresenting themselves on this app is astounding. And what I mean by that is you might have somebody with tons of experience. They're really credible. And this specifically happened with a friend of mine she's an expert. I don't want to say what, because I don't want to put her name out there, but she's a particular expert. And I thought, oh my gosh, she's going to be so great. She got on and she kind of talked a little bit like this. And I went, hold on, we got to fix this. Like you are not abort. Can we please close this room right now?
Yeah.
And thinking about how powerful, usually I do work with video, but also with audio, for example. And that's where Clubhouse has really ballooned up this whole need for, we've got to make sure that we are avoiding things like upspeak, where we say a statement, but we say it with a question mark. As I'm Karen Laos, not I'm Karen Laos.
Yeah. Yeah. You're so right. The audio side really separates, right? Because you don't see them, you don't see their body language. So you're just listening. And if you close your eyes and you just listen, you feel confidence in someone's voice. And if someone is talking about what they do and they're lacking that confidence, or they're even questioning it for a second, making excuses for them, calling themselves, oh my God, I know I sound so dumb or whatever.
Right.
It immediately takes out any sort of trust from the audience from ever thinking that person's in a place of authority. I want to hire that person. And sometimes that can get you in trouble because sometimes those loud, real confident people are the ones that don't know anything, right? So you end up hiring the people that like are the, you know, those people that can talk a mile a minute, but don't actually have anything back up. But it has to be kind of a joint effort, right? You have to speak confidently about what you do in addition to being really good at what it is that you do. I
Right.
love this. I
Yeah.
love it. So wait, what were you saying? Were you saying
Oh,
something?
well, what I was going to say is I talk about this a lot when I do interview coaching, which I don't do that often, but sometimes I do because it's ultimately how do you want to come across and how focused can you be? Do you represent yourself well? And the truth is, we have to put out the sad reality that it is true that life is unfair. And might have two candidates, just like you're talking about. One has less experience than the other, but the one that communicates better is, of course, the one that you're going to pick.
No question.
And it's such a good example of how communication just across the board is the number one skill that we could all have and need to be able to influence and be seen as an influential leader and come across the way that we want to.
It's so true. And I think that, you know, in this day and age, 2022, when we're talking in sound bites, we have very limited attention. You know, we're not meeting a lot of people in person. So it's really a lot of it is digital, virtual, you know, audio, Instagram, like things like that. So we need to find ways that we can speak up and you know, display exactly who we are or who we believe we are across the board. I think it's so important. Communication is everything. It's everything. And I'm sure you talk about this when you do interview coaching, you only have a few seconds to really capture that. And if you like when you help people on stages, right? So I talked openly about this with you last night or yesterday on DMs, that's my goal for this year is like get on more stages, get hired to speak more. I believe I can. It's just about getting there, right?
Yes.
So the question is, what do you tell people, if they're anxious getting up on stages? And then another question is, what do you think is like what makes a really amazing public speaker?
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, it's important that everybody know that there is no difference physiologically between nervousness and excitement.
I love that. I say it all the time. Love it, love it, love it.
Yes.
It's very
So
calming to feel that, to know that. Yeah.
exactly. And I would recommend everybody look up Daniel Pink's 2-minute video. It's called Pink Cast. If you Google
I don't know
anxious
that.
reappraisal. Yeah, anxious reappraisal is the term that this woman, Allison Wood Brooks, came up with through Harvard. And he's got it's really funny. It's cute, but it speaks more to the logic behind this. For most of us, we want to bottom line it, right? So what do we do? Okay, if I'm nervous, I don't want somebody to tell me, just calm down. Like that is not helpful. And he talks about there's a high arousal, low arousal emotion, and more of the scientific stuff behind it, but he's also really funny too. But the key here is say, I'm excited. And again, I'm sure these are same messages that you're putting out, Donna, but it's so much about tricking our brain. We've got to trick our brain and then our body's going to go along with it. I mean, that's the same idea with Mel Robbins and the
I was just about to say, disrupting those thoughts, right? She talks all the time about that. Don't even let yourself go down that place. That's why she uses that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, because it's like it disrupts your brain from, you know, adding onto it, building on it. We can really tell ourselves a story about how bad things can go, right?
It's so true. And half the time we do that and those things don't even happen. So, you know, it's
They
the
almost
same
never
reason
happen.
yeah, totally. And it's like you said the other day about just with people on Clubhouse, like, oh, I sound so dumb, or oh, is it okay if I ask a question? It's like, just ask, just be. You don't need to apologize for showing up or being yourself. But to your question about what makes a good public speaker.
Yes.
First of all, it's connection. And with connection, what that means is there's so many components of connection, but it's that how do you build that trust, credibility, and you do that through connection where people feel, are you authentic? Are you being real? I see too many people. I'm amazed at the amount of people still that do this. Have you ever seen a speaker and then, or maybe you're talking to the speaker before the event or after, either way, and they don't match the way they come across up on stage?
All the time.
Like this presenter mode, like, and now Donna, we're going to talk about good communication skills. It's like, who is this person?
Yeah.
And we've got to make sure that, because that's going to hinder our credibility. It's going to start eroding our credibility if we're not the same person. Obviously, you're going to flex, like I'm going to speak a little bit louder. Now, of
You're
course,
going to amp it up a bit. Hence
yes,
the podcast.
yes,
When you're going to go,
amp
I
it
mean,
up.
that's natural. Whenever the camera turns on or whenever you go on a stage, it's not a bad thing that you have to up it a bit, because
Yeah,
that's just performance. But you're right.
yeah,
The
you gotta
general
have,
vibe.
yeah, it totally, the vibe, that's such a good word for it, because it's making sure that you have the energy compared to when you might be sitting one-on-one chatting with somebody in a small room. You know, you're not
Yeah.
going to be
Yeah.
projecting really loud.
Can
But
you
what
imagine?
I know, it's like,
Karen, what do you want to talk about today on this podcast?
well, I'm laughing too, because I actually can't imagine, because sometimes my husband in bed will go, honey, we're in the same room. I can hear you. I always get all these ideas at 1 a.m. Like, honey, he's like, why do you start talking about these things right before we're going to go to bed?
Bad timing.
Yes,
Okay,
yeah.
that's funny. All right, keep going. So credibility, I mean connection. Connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to say something about voice, because this is
Yes.
also something very prominent that happens a lot. So most women don't speak loud enough. And what I mean by that is project enough. And we've got to think about projecting from the diaphragm, which is this awesome muscle right around our stomach. But think about when you go to a concert, you know, you're like, yeah, and you're yelling from your throat. And a lot of people yell when they try to speak louder. It's like, no, no, no. And we usually, when we yell, we are in a higher range, and then
Yeah.
we don't sound as credible. So you want to think about breathing through your diaphragm, where you almost imagine the air coming down your throat into your diaphragm stomach area, and then you project from there. But that's a little mechanics, but here's what very tangibly happens a lot.
Okay.
I'll be recording someone, and then we watch it back, and I will know that they need to speak louder, and they'll hear it and go, my gosh, you're right. Like, there's something about the video when people see it themselves, when they have the reality. Like, I could tell someone you need to project, but until they hear it themselves and they go, oh, wow, you're right. There's always this disparity gap between how we think we're coming across and how we actually are coming across.
100%.
So, yeah,
100%.
it's just being mindful of that. And so I always tell people, exaggerate your projection and then trust the video. This is the one time I tell people, don't trust yourself until you watch the video and you see, because your voice is probably going to be much softer than you feel it is when you're talking.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting. And that voice really, it keeps people's attention. It keeps people engaged. And I think that is it's less, I think you can be a really, really, well-spoken person. You can have a great message, but if you're not doing that delivery across the board, like you'll lose people's attention. Just like when you go live on Instagram and you see people dropping off, that's a sign. Or when you start a Clubhouse room and it just gets lower and lower and lower, like take that as a note. People are not interested. They're not engaged. It's not personal. It's just not engaging enough. So, okay. I love this conversation. So Karen, how do you work with women? One-on-one, group, what?
Yeah, 3 ways.
Okay.
One is, the biggest thing that I do primarily is speaking engagements in corporate environments.
Great.
When it comes to the individual, there are 2 ways. One is one-on-one, and we start right away with the video coaching, and that accelerates people's growth, because very quickly people see, okay, how am I coming across? And we always start
So do you have them go on video on them or their own, and then you guys like audit together?
We do it together. So it would be like right now, if I was doing this with you, I would record it on QuickTime, and then we'd watch it back, just like a 1-minute clip of, say, you introducing yourself. And then we watch it back and we look at and celebrate the things that you're doing well. And then look at things that you could change, maybe that you might not even know are there. And that's what's been interesting with people that say later, they go, I never knew the blind spots I had until I started working with you. I actually thought I wasn't as bad. No, not exactly. But yeah, that's what I love, is that we can uncover these things that people didn't even know. And one of the biggest blind spots that most people have is saying their name with a question mark. That's that upspeak again. So just to model this briefly, what we don't want to do is say, hi, I'm Karen Laos, and I'm originally from Minneapolis, but now I live in San Francisco, versus, hi, I'm Karen Laos. I'm originally from Minneapolis, but now I live in San Francisco.
Oh, it's such a different experience, right? It totally sounds much more like, okay, let's hear what you have to say, Karen.
Exactly. Exactly.
I
And
trust you
that,
more.
yes. And it's so important to start with that. So that's part of
I
my
love it.
process with the one-on-one. Of course, we talk about content and how to stop rambling and get to the point. And as I like to say, I'm a recovering rambler. So
Yeah.
I'm very passionate about that. And then I have a group coaching program, which is 6 weeks, and it's called Speak with Confidence, where we start with really, who do you want to be? A little snippet of personal branding, more of what kind of experience do you want to create for people?
Yeah.
And then we walk through presence, how to ask for what you want, a little bit of storytelling, how to have a powerful elevator pitch. And we practice a lot. So there's a lot of video included in that program as well.
I love it. Karen, you're awesome. So how do people find you?
Thanks. Well, I have a podcast called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laos, and you're going to be on that podcast very
I
soon
can't wait.
as well.
I can't wait.
And then at Karen Laos Consulting on Instagram is where I am there. So those two places are
And
the
you have a
best
beautiful
places.
website. I did a little research and I love your
Thank
website.
you.
So KarenLaos.com as well. And all the links will be in the show notes here. Karen, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you.
You're
And
welcome.
I can't wait to be on your podcast too. So you
Yes.
guys check out Karen's podcast. Thank you so much. Have a good
Thanks.
one.